Good afternoon. I, Sadra Shanaz, would like to welcome you all in this session of our value-added course entitled Ancient History from the Point of View of Civil Services Examination. I hope you all are taking advantage of this course. Uh, Now, I would like to introduce today's expert, Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid, Assistant Professor at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Integral University. The topic he has taken to speak is Vedic religion and literature. Welcome, Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid. Now you can proceed with your lecture.
Uh, Thank you to the chair and thank you, Dr. Shadra Sahnaz ma'am, for such a handsome introduction. So, without any further delay, with the permission of chair, may I proceed with my topic? Thank you to the chair. The topic for today's presentation is Vedic religion and literature. I will be speaking on module 2, that is Vedic religion of module 2 subtopic Vedic religion and literature. Religion and literature being a very important part of this age, as it was organized into 18 memoirs, or you can say travelogues. The literature was such that it was such a way in such a way it was covered by European historian that it appears to be a travelogue, and predominantly the Orientalist historians have covered it in such a way that it is their common origin of the Vedic literature and religion as well is portrayed in a similar way. So these Orientalist historians have portrayed it in such a way that the widespread burden theory's impact or effect is completely seen in their approach. So without and the patriarchal system is also, we have a glimpse of patriarchy also in the Vedic literature, where most of the hymns, predominantly all the hymns, are composed by the male members. So the question that arises when we are investigating in this topic is, what is religion, what is literature, and what is Vedic religion and literature? So first we should talk about what is religion. Religion is a set of organized belief, practices, system that most often relate to the belief of and worship of controlled force, such as personal God or another supernatural being. Religion often involves cultural beliefs, worldviews, text, prophecies, revelation, and morals, and have spiritual meanings to members of a particular faith. It can encompass a range of practices, including ceremonies, rituals, prayers, meditation, holy places, symbols, trace, and feasts. So, while this is a basic definition, there are many different understanding of what religion is. Not all religions are centered on the belief in a god, gods, or supernatural force. The famed psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud described religion as a form of wish fulfillment. However, modern psychology recognizes the religion can play an important role in individuals' life experiences and even improve health and well-being. In fact, studies have shown that religion can help people develop healthy habits, regulate their behavior, and understanding their emotions, all factors that can affect your health in a positive way. According to an estimate of 90% of the population has some type of religious affiliation. So now coming to what is literature. Literature is any written work, but is usually referred to works of fiction or novel, plays, poems, and short stories. This is because these types of works are usually seen as being more artistic and having more value than other types of writing, such as non-fiction or informal text. A study of literature is essential to understand humanity. Without literature, we would not be known about thoughts, emotion, experience of people from different cultures and times. Knowledge of history of literature is also necessary to understand how our own culture has developed. The first example of literature dates back around 34 3500 BCE, when the Sumerians began writing on clay tablets in cuneiform script. Ancient form of writing was used by the Babylonians and Assyrians as well. The earliest known work of literature from the period is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian poem about a hero's journey. The next major development in the history of literature came from with the intervention of alphabet in around 1500 BCE. This made it possible for people to write down their thoughts and experience in which in a much more efficient way than before. Ancient Greeks used the alphabet to develop their own literary tradition. Not to forget Jacques Derrida, who in his theory of deconstruction give the signifier and the signified theory, in which signifier signifies a particular symbol. For example, apple, if we do not, if we decode it with alphabet A, it will appear in our mind. So there are tremendous scholars who have exceptionally good work in this area. So coming back to the topic, that they wrote plays such that the Greek wrote plays such as Trojan Woman poem including the Iliad, which tells the story of siege of Troy. The Romans opted many aspects of Greek culture and language, including their writing system. A page from the Codex Gigas, the world's largest medieval manuscript. The first book were made in China around 500 BCE. They were often collections of stories of folk tales that told moral and religious lessons. The Chinese then used the written word to help a rich tradition of poetry and drama. The first book that was also known as novel 100 Nights, 101 Nights, which was written in Arabic, is also a good example of this. So now coming to the fact, what is Vedic literature? So Vedic literature is the name given to the vast body of text that primarily deals with rituals. These includes principal Vedas, that is Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, and Athar Veda. While they all consist primarily of mantras, prayers, or chants that were meant to be used on ritual occasion, each of these texts had certain distinct characteristics. The hymns in Rig Veda are generally addressed to Agni, the god of fire, identified with sacrificial fire, Indra, a deity associated with warfare, and Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. Probably it was intoxicating. Beside these three principal deities, we find wide range of other gods and few goddesses as well. The hymns are grouped into 10 books as mandalas, of which the earliest are books 2 and 7, often referred to as the family books. as each one is supposed to have been composed and compiled by a single family or a clan of priests. The Samaveda consists of chants from Rig Veda arranged in keeping with the Vedic hierarchy. As such, it contains virtual no original material. In the Yajurveda, on the other hand, mantras are arranged in a sequence in which they were meant to be used in specific sacrificial ritual. While some of these drawn from the Rig Veda, others are new composition, including some of the earliest work in Sanskrit prose. Finally, the Atharva Veda consists of prayers and chants addressed to the Vedic gods and also to cure illness as well as to attain success in the affairs of the heart. It is often regarded as text that provides insight into popular beliefs and practices. These texts are composed and compiled over a very long period, possibly spanning a thousand year from 1800 BCE onwards. Although you can imagine society was not static during the entire phase. Secondly, Rig Veda was probably compiled in the northwest of the subcontinent, the region of present day Punjab, while the other texts have a more easterly orientation. As such, what we know from the text pertains to a specific geographic region and does not tell us about history of entire subcontinent. The texts were composed in Vedic Sanskrit, somewhat different from classic Sanskrit, by and for the priest. The priestly perspective and the basis of inheritance in it have to be kept in mind while analyzing the text to understand the social order. Very often, we find a distinction being made between the early and the later Vedic literature. Here, the Rig Veda is regarded as an early Vedic text, which attained a final form by 1000 BCE, while other three Vedas are regarded as later Vedic. Other texts that are considered later Vedic included Brahmanas, elaborate commentaries on the Vedas that explain and define the rituals and contain myths and legend. The Aranyakas and the Upanishads, which are primarily philosophical works, are also regarded as of later Vedic age. The earliest of the texts were composed between 1000 to 500 BCE. There is also a third category of literature known as Vedangas or the limbs of the Vedas. These include works on pronunciation, phonetics, grammar, etymology, astrology, and huge corpus called the Kalp Sutra, which in turn has a four subdivision. The Saruta Sutra, which deals with major rituals such as Ashwamedha and the Rajsurya, the Greha Sutra, which lay the norms of domestic ritual, including the rites of passage, the Dharma Sutra, that lays the down the norms, and the Sulabh Sutra, laying down the principle of geometry that was used for the construction of sacrificial altar. These texts were also composed over long period of time between 800 BCE to 200 BCE. As you can see, the span of time related to Vedic age is vast. Archaeologically, it includes the time frame covered by the post-Harappan cultures, including those with grey ware, painted grey ware cultural sites of Ganga, Yamuna, Doab, and the northern black polished ware associated with early urban centers in Ganga Valley and elsewhere in the subcontinent. The archaeological evidences is extremely rich and diverse. However, most of it comes from exploration that excavation and even where there have been excavations. These are, with a few exceptions, small ventricle trenches designed to correlate chronologies rather than horizontal excavations that allow us to trace out contours of settlement. So, while broad correlations between textual and archaeological evidences have been attempted, detailed, meaningful comparisons are often difficult given the special given the specific characters of the text and the nature of the archaeological records as available at present. With these limitations in mind, it is necessary to explore the three hymns or the three themes: Varna, kingship structures, ritual, and their significance. So, Varna is a term that literally means color. However, the Vedic text and later as well is used to designate social categories. Such designations can be viewed from at least two perspectives. One, some people, in the case the priest, can claim the right to assign status and to themselves as well as others. The two These ranks or the labels can be accepted or rejected or modified by those to whom these are assigned. Let us examine the situation in which the term was used and its implication. One way in which the term is used in the Rig Veda is to distinguish between two Varnas, that was Aryas and the Dasas. There have been long debates on the distinctive features of these categories. Initially, in the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, it was suggested that differences between two varna was racial. However, the racist perception that have been called into question, and it is evident that while there were social differences in early India, these were not categorized in terms of race. The glimpse of racism comes to our mind when we study the history of this period using Orientalist lens, or sometimes to be more specific and precise, the European lens. Racism is something which is in the DNA of the Europeans, early Europeans, I will say. And during the colonial ages, it was clearly evident that white burden theory was coming into play. The white supremacy was such that it affected the way history is written, that is historiography. And secondly, the influences of Ashkenazi Jews, who were predominantly known as Zionists, was another important factor in which these history was altered. The Zionists claims themselves to be of a superior race. Not only this, they have made intervention in their holy texts and called as Torah, which is now known as which is now known as which is excuse me, sorry, that which is now known as Talmud, in which the world is separated into two. That is Talmud, in which the world is separated into two kind of people, Jews and the Gentile. The Jews were supposed to be the of superior race and were meant to be as rulers, or the people who will run the administration, and the subjects will be Gentile or the non-Jewish people. I don't associate this theory with all the Jews. In fact, I believe and strongly believe that all Zionists are Jews, but not all Jews are Zionists. So this have been influencing our way the European history is being written. Be it any kind of scholar who is coming from Europe have devised the history in such a way that it appears to be that Aryans were a people of fair complexion, and these people were killing, or you can say they were trying to civilize the people of Dravidian race who were dark complexioned people. Initially, in the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, it was suggested that the difference between the two Varnas was racial, but later it becomes quite evident that it was racial. What is likely in is that the Aryas and the Dasas differed in language, cultural practices, and religious belief practices. Reference to Aryas and Dasas occur in specific section of Rig Veda. In hymns addressed to Indra, while the deity where the deity is invoked to ensure the victory of the Aryas over the Dasas, or praised for having defeated and overcome them. However, these references are not plentiful. All told, less than 40 references in the text that runs into more than 10,000 verses. More frequently, we find social groups being identified using two terms, which sometimes appear to be synonymous. While the term Jana, which is still used till date in several Indian languages and means people, the second is the term Vis, from which the word Vaishya was derived. Both the term refer to the groups of people who constituted a community with shared interest, economic, political, and ritual. Present day scholars often consider these terms to be equivalent to our notion of tribes or clans. The concept of clans refers to the European way of writing history, because these clans are the word clan is clearly evident into the racist organization of the early American century, or you can say the early days of liberated America, where the blacks were persecuted, the Ku Klux Klan. Hence, this clan factor is a very important factor. There are indications that the Jana and the Vis facilitated as militia, participating in raids on rival groups. It is also likely that they participated in assembly, where the dominant role was probably played by the priest or chief. At this stage, Jana and the Vis were not regarded as Varnas. However, here in occasional mention of Arya Vis and the Dasa Vis, which may suggest that sometimes the terms Vis and Varna were thought to be interchangeable. There is, however, one spectacular and frequently referred to fourfold Varna order in the Rig Veda. This occurs in 10th mandala on one of the latest sections of the text in the hymn known as Purushukta. This describes the sacrifice of primeval man and visualizes creation as emanating from the sacrifice. In this text, in this context, it is stated that the Brahmana emerged from the mouth of man, Kshatriya from the arms, Vash from the thighs, and the Shudras from the feet. There are two ideas that are implicate in the conceptualization. One, that the fourfold order was had a divine origin and hence cannot be questioned. And the second, that there is clear cut hierarchy amongst the Varnas, with the Brahmins at the top order and the others ranked below. Apart from the Purushukta, there are very few references to Varna categories in the Rig Veda. While we do have references to priests, they are not invariably identified as Brahmanas. The term Kshatriyas too occurs infrequently, and the only reference of the Vaishyas and the Shudras in the single verse mentioned above. Therefore, scholars have argued that ideas of Varnas was relatively underdeveloped in the early Vedic phase. So we get to know that the Varn was a fluid category during the early Vedic period and it becomes a rigid category in the later Vedic period. In the later Vedic phase, that we find evidence of a number of new developments and growing perception with identifying men's in terms of Varna as well as identifying the contents of Varna identity. So it is useful to visualize these identities as crystallizing, and the three concerned are the access to ritual domain, access to political power, and the access to resources. As is obvious that these concerns were interwoven rather than watertight compartments. Beside mention, as mentioned earlier, the texts at our disposal are Brahmanical. So we often get to see resolution from Brahmanical point of view, which needs not necessarily have been accepted by members of the other Varna. Beside, not everybody necessarily accept Varna as a category of identity. These qualifying remarks needs to be kept in mind in the course of following discussion. To start with ritual domain, we notice two or three different issues being explored. One of these issues are ritual specialists who are being regarded as Brahmanas. Here, the emergence as resolution was a combination of the creation of birth and the knowledge of ritual tradition or Shruti in Sanskrit. It appears that birth was regarded as a necessary but not sufficient condition. The proclamation and the acceptance of these criteria means that effectively who were assigned to other varnas as well as women were excluded from legitimacy, acting as ritual specialists. The second problem centered around participation in the ritual on the basis were people to be involved in the proceedings. Their wealthy patrons, especially the Kshatriyas, were organized as being of crucial importance. Others including wives of the patrons, the sons, and the supporters were also included in the rituals, where they were expected to play sacrifice specific roles, as discussed earlier. The third issue was the significance of the assigned ritual. During the later Vedic and post-Vedic period, there was move away from the actual performance of rituals to a contemplation of their inner significance, which in turn lead to the philosophical speculation of the Upanishad. This, as may be expected, probably posed a challenge to the status of Brahmins as ritual priests. By the time when the Dharma Sutras were composed, Brahmanas claimed exclusive control over the ritual domain. Six means of livelihood were recognized for them. These included studying, teaching the Vedas, performing and getting sacrifice performed, giving and receiving gifts. At the same time, the text recognizes that these options could not be exercised in all situations, including series of provisions, catalogs, apadharma, or the rulers who were in crisis, which could be adopted by brahmanas in situations where the legitimate modes of livelihoods were not available. In the Vedic Sanskrit, there was a systematic effort on the part of brahmanas to monopolize claims to the rituals. It is also marked by recognition that political powers, which was becoming consolidated, should ideally belong exclusively to the Kshatriya. Later Vedic literature is replete with myths, legends, and rituals that discuss the regulation of access to political power. These explore two or three different possibilities. The first possibilities that is explored is that of rivalry or competition between the Brahmana and the Kshatriyas. As may be expected, the text resolve this conflict by suggesting that Brahmanas is inevitably victorious. But at the same time, the authors insist that ideal's include situation is one not of competition but of cooperation between the two, and that the ideal ruler who acknowledged the supremacy of the Brahmanas was the real ruler. We may never know whether the represented reality, but it is likely that the relationship between the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas varied in concrete situations. The second situation that is discussed is the relationship between Kshatriya and the Vis or the Vaishyas. This is visualized less as situation of rivalry and more as one where the basis of mutual support was being called into question. There is constant refrain that the early Vedic context, the relationship between the two categories was harmonious and they were mutually supportive. However, in the later Vedic situation, the Kshatriyas is visualized as inappropriate resources from the Vis, and in this context, the and the resistance of the Vis, as well as the threat of withdrawing support, seems to have been real. So, efforts were made to establish some kind of understanding between the two. One means of achieving this was by incorporating important members of the WIS within the administrative structure. We find this happening in the village in the case of village headman or the Gramani who was recognized as one of the supporters of the king. The Dharma Sutra laid down the meanings of livelihood for the Kshatriya as well. These of three of these ways in studying the Vedas, getting sacrifice performed and making gifts are common with the Brahmanas and the Vaishyas. The other pertained to collecting taxes, administrating justice, and protecting the people. Curiously, some of the major post Vedic ruling lineages, such as those of Nandas, Mauryas, and Sungas, are not recognized as Kshatriyas. It is also worth noting that whenever the fourfold Varna order is mentioned in Buddhist Jaina traditions, the Kshatriyas are invariably placed first before the Brahmins. This would suggest that the norm for political relation that the Brahmins attempted to lay were not invariably followed. Turning to the quest that material resources being tied to Varna, is evident that the Brahmanas were ideally supposed to depend on gifts as a means of livelihood. For Kshatriya, resources were obtained from warfare as as taxes that could be le- levied on as wages for protection that was to be offered to subjects as fines levied for offenses. The Vaishyas were conceived as backbone of the system, with the Dharma Sutra prescribing that they could engage in agriculture, pastoralism, and trade. If we examine the archaeological record, it is evident that both agriculture and pastoralism had been practiced in the region for a very long time. The evidence of the sites associated with northern Blackware potteries would indicate that trade was developing well. This is suggested both by evidences of widespread distinctive pottery as well as by widespread dispersal of punched mark coins. The Shudras figured marginally in the Vedic tradition, or one can say they were the subaltern of this age. They were occasionally mentioned as participants in rituals, but wherever they were present, this was viewed as a situation that required special ritual precautions. More often than not, they were assigned roles that underlined their subordination in the society. And the later Dharma Sutra, that the only role assigned to the Shudras is serving the three higher Varnas. We also find the beginning of notion of untouchability, although these are not sharply crystallized as this at this stage. Yet the text reluctantly acknowledged that there were alternatives and that in some situations Shudras could be wealthy. We also know that the ruling dynasties such as Nandas were regarded as Shudras by origin. However, it is clear that the Varna order was not a fixed, as the Brahmins may have ideally wanted it to be, and that variation and contestation were possible. The early Vedic texts present us with variety of evidences on kingship relation, gods and occasionally goddesses. are visualized as in kinship terms, as fathers, brothers, or even sons. We also have depictions of conjugal relations. It is likely that these images of divine world were based on human practices. The bond that figures most commonly in the father-son tie is quite evident. This is envisaged as one of the mutual support. Just as father supports his son when he is small, the son is expected to support his father in his old age. At another level, there are frequent prayers for brave sons in Rig Vedas. Prayers for daughters are virtually absent, although there are several prayers for children in general. The situation continues almost unchanged in the later Vedic context. There we find several rituals being prescribed to ensure the birth of sons as well as to reinforce the bond between father and the son. These include rituals like Agnihotra or the daily offering to fires that was prescribed for householder as well as major rituals such as Ashwamedha and Rajsurya. What is more, we begin to find statesmen viewing daughters as negative element, as the source of sorrow for their parents. The father-son bond was also visualized as extending beyond the immediate pair. The idea was developed through the concept of Pitra, the patrilineal ancestor. The Pitra was relatively unimportant in the Rig Veda, being mentioned most frequently in the 10th mandala, which was noted earlier in relatively late section of the text. However, they are assigned far more importance in the later Vedic tradition, where they were invoked on virtually every ritual occasion. Kapith were generally defined as three generations of male patronage ancestor, the father, the grandfather, and the great grandfather. Offering prayers to him mean that their memories would be preserved, while those of other ancestors, including matrilineal kinsfolk, would be marginalized. It is likely that emphasizing the father-son bond was important in situation of resource control where claiming to be part of specific lineage as often as means of staking a claim to the inheritance of its resource. While emphasis on patrilineal ties seems to grow over time, relationship with the other kinsmen were envisaged as being more complicated. We can look at these under two heads: kinsmen related through marriage, affinal relatives, and the kinsmen who are visualized as potential rivals. The first category would include the father in law and the maternal uncle. The latter is virtually unknown in the early Vedic traditions, and the former figures in the text known as marriage hymn, which is part of late 10th mandala of Rig Veda. Both are accorded respect and recognition as well as special hospitality, especially in the post Vedic tradition, which would suggest the bonds with these categories were regarded as increasingly important. The second category included those designated as the Bharatavya and the Sapanata. The first term means brother like man, while the second means rival. The literally meaning seems to be men who either share common wife or are related through woman who is wife of one of them. Both of the term extremely rare in the Rig Vedas, but become important in the later Vedic situation. Whether rituals were designed to resolve the conflict with the Bhartavya or Sapanata, usually the resolution was envisaged in terms of elimination, destruction, or appropriation of resources of the rivals. Other kinsmen were designated as Samana, literally equals to Sava, one's own, or Sajata, those later designed to win the support of these groups, but at the same time to treat them as subordinates. What can we suggest that the kinship relationship were being envisaged in terms of conflict inequality? The only important exception is this was the father-son bond. Perhaps the most dramatic systematic changes that were envisaged are those within the household. The Rig Veda contains a variety of terms that were used to designate household. Some of these have been synonymous. In other cases, is likely that the terms stood for different situations or institutions. Two of them that have attracted considerable attentions are Dham or Dama or Graha. The Dham was envisaged as household under the joint control of husband and wife, who was called as Dampati, dual. They were expected to be harmonious and of one mind, to work in accord with one another. What is more, both sons and daughters seems to have been welcome in the Dham. The situation in the Graha appears to have been rather different. It was envisaged as an institution with single male head, known as Grahapati. The Grah is recognized as an important social unit in the later Vedic tradition, where reference to alternative modes of household organization declined sharply. Ultimately, it becomes virtually the sole form of household that is recognized in the texts such as Grah Sutra. The ideal grah was expected to have three components: Patni or wife, who was ideally a virgin belonging to the same Varna as the Pati, cattle, the basic production resource, and sons. The functions assigned to Grahapati included offering hospitality and resources to the priest and the king, as well as to other both within and outside his home. He was also expected to perform ritual. Grahapati figures as an important social category in Buddhist tradition as well, where he was regarded as an ideal patron of Buddha Sangha. It is evident that the Vedic or post-Vedic texts were preoccupied with consolidating vision of people ordering a patriarchal with the Grahapati as a nodal figure in the entire process. Given the fact that we are examining the ritual text, it is perhaps necessary to look at the social significance and more with a more close eye. As we have seen, there are two broad categories of text under consideration, those that include mantras and those that are explanatory or justificatory in nature. The mantras are in the nature of prayers. The ability to learn and chant mantras were restricted to selected few. The priest and some situation the patrons of sacrifice of the yajna were allowed to do so. As such, access to the mantra in itself could have constituted a basis of social differentiation. Mantras also tell us about hopes, fears, aspiration of those who use them, while there are some prayers for intangible. Many of the prayers were designed for specific material goals. These included acquiring cattle in particular in particular and animals in general, winning battles, getting progeny. Interestingly, while many of these are visualized as collective goals in the Rig Vedas, the use of mantras and rituals in the later Vedic traditions seems to be more individuated, with provision for a single sacrificer or patrons who were expected to benefit from performance of the ritual. It has also been argued that visualization of deities in ritual context might reflect a social order. For instance, if prayers are addressed to Agni, and if Agni is conceived of a divine priest, as indeed is often the case is, the one can argue for the importance of priests in the human society. It has also been suggested that given the goddesses as marginals in Vedic tradition in terms of numbers, prayers addressed to them, as well as invocations in the ritual context, it is likely that women were subordinated in the society. While we reconstruct the plausible, we need to remember that connection between religious imaginations and social realities is not always neat. Most rituals can be understood as occasions of public performance. These are significant in variety of ways. Any ritual occasion, by definition, has an aura of sanctity associated with it, as it is a situation where God and men and occasionally women were brought into contact with one another. As such ritual performance many carry for greater weight of ordinary routine modes of social communication. While rituals can have range of functions, they are also used to legitimize social relation. As an extension of this, the roles performed by men and women in the ritual context acquire heightened significance. We have seen how priestly roles were often defined as exclusive and central to ritual performance. It is likely that these could have been used to claim authority in other social contexts as well. The Dharma Sutra suggests the Brahmins claim exemption from taxation from capital punishment. We do not know how far this was exercised by a ruler, but possibility that such claims were influenced cannot be altered or cannot be ruled out altogether. So other important participant in that included in Yajmana or the patrons of the sacrifice were that they could include chief, king, grahapati, ideally the head of the household, and a man belonging to one of the first three religions. A basic criteria for eligibility was that the person required to perform the ritual, pay the requisite sacrificial fee to those who attended the ritual. Thus, an inability to perform a sacrifice was a public proclamation So, we are sorry for the interruption. I will be beginning from where I left you because of some technical glitches. This happened. So, once again, apologies for this. So I was discussing that what was the status of women in the later Vedic phases, and what is and how they were depicted and portrayed in the Vedic text. So women didn't enjoy a very high status in the Vedic period. They were basically subordinated by their male counterparts, and the Vedic society was divided into Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The Shudra occupied the lowest position, and sometimes he was equivalent to a woman in the society. So now coming back that the Yajanas, that the inclusions and exclusion hold true for the rituals that were designated as sutras or shrutis, in which included a range of sacrifices such as daily agnihotra, the fortnightly new and full moon sacrifices, grand elaborate rituals such as Ashwamedha and Rajsuya. Unfortunately, we don't have means of assessing whether and how often such rituals were performed. Buddhist traditions and epics indicate that some of the elaborate sacrifices may have taken place, but even in these narratives, the historicity of the specific account remains unverified. What we do not know is that the post-Vedic situation, a whole range of domestic rituals were brought within the purview of Brahminical tradition. Throughout the composition and compilation of the texts such as Greh Sutra, the two or three trends are in evidence. One, on, on one hand, many sutras rituals were simplified as they could have been performed by the average householder. On the other hand, wide range of rites of passage and association with occasions such as birth, marriage, and deaths were Brahmanized. This was done through threefold strategy. The recommendation the, by recommending the use of Vedic mantras, by suggesting the priest should be present on such occasion, and by insisting on setting up a sacrificial fire. As may be expected, this was probably intended as strategy of introducing ideas of varna and gender hierarchies within the household. The extent to which such strategies succeeded is uncertain. Post-Vedic Brahminical texts produce a long list of dividends. People who violated social and ritual norms. These included Brahmanas who did not learn Vedas, who performed sacrifices for those who did not meet the criteria laid down in the text, who did not perform the Soma sacrifices, and so on. The list goes longer and longer with the passage of time. So now I'll be summing up and concluding the whole lecture. That is, it is important to keep in mind that Vedic texts and were vast and diverse, and that they span an enormous period of time. As such, differences are to be expected in the text. In so far as social histories are concerned, they permit us to deconstruct Brahminical perceptions and tradition and prescriptions about ideal society. These need to these need not necessarily correspond entirely on the social realities as far as Varna is concerned. It was of marginal importance during the early phase and acquired importance as classificatory system. during the later Vedic period. However, it is clear that Varna identities were never the sole identities available to men. It is also evident that the contents of these identities were formulated over time. Kinship related were also subjected to definition of crystallization during this period. We can trace the consolidation of preliminary identities and the emergence of Grahapati center of the household or the hub of the household. The Vedic, excuse me, the Vedic texts envisage rituals as modes of communications of social norms and values. These included notions of social hierarchy, of support and subordinations. However, there is evidence of deviation and change, and these messages were probably not automatically accepted. As far as the status of women was concerned, we find that subordination of women is quite clear from the Vedic hymns. Women was in women were considered as omens if they were present in some kind of yajnas in the yags. They were believed to be unwelcome for in case of births. They were hymns that were related for the birth of a male child. But at the end, I will say that these kind of patriarchal way of understanding or writing history has been part and parcel of European way of writing history that is deeply influenced by patriarchy, racism, and not the least the whitesman burden theory. With this, I come to the end of my presentation, and now, with the permission of the chair, may I declare the floor thrown open for question and answer. The viewers are expected to write questions in the comment box, which I will read out, and then I will answer your queries. Thank you. So the first question comes from a student of so the first question comes from Wasifa Barkati, a student from B Honors History. I believe she is in fourth semester. What kind of polity existed in the Vedic age? See, I have already discussed this in my presentation, and I'm repeating it again. The polity of the Vedic age was in the early Vedic period, the polity was related to varna that was fluid in nature, means one person who is following one profession can follow the another, and his socio-economic status was not delivered or you cannot decide was not decided according to his profession. He can amass huge fortune and can be equated with a purohita or priest, or he can or was someone who can go close to the status of Brahman and exactly can become Brahman. So this was, and in the later Vedic phase, we say that the this Varna system was compartmentalized and become extremely rigid. Nobody was allowed to change his socio-economic status, and also his Varna. Shudra will remain Shudra, Vash will remain Vash, and Brahmana and Kshatriya were going to contest for the top position. So I believe this must have answered your question. If you want further details, you can ask it again. I believe this have answered your question, Vasva Barkati. So the next question comes from Kulsum Anjali. Okay, Ume Kulsum, uh, another student from fourth semester. Explain the position of explain the position of women in the Vedic society. As I was discussing in my concluding remarks as well, that the women was subordinated in the suffering from subordination in the Vedic society. In the early Vedic society, the women involved in composing some kind of hymns, but we see in the later Vedic phase that they were completely absent from the public spaces. So the women were completely subordinated by the male counterpart, including indicating the patriarchal nature of the society. Probably this must could have been a fault of historiographers as well, who have studied or extensively worked on this area, due to widespread burden theory, which also promotes patriarchy in certain way. This must have happened, but as far as the evidences are concerned, from the which we gather from Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samveda, and the absence of women is clearly evident, and the birth of women or birth of a female child were considered as a omen. So this was the condition of women in the Vedic society. Iram Fatima, another student of fourth semester. What is the geographic area of the Vedic period? See, the Vedic period was actually geographically divided into three areas. First areas, that is the area of all the happenings, was Aryavarta. Second was Madhya Desa, and the third was Dakshin Pantha. These three was the geographic distinctions of the Vedic period. And the most important for which is close to the heart of Vedic age and the studies of Vedic age was Aryavarta, where every happening happened and where the Rig Vedas are supposed to have been composed of. So I believe this must have answered your question, Iram Fatma. Any other question? Any other question? Please write in your comment box, and it should be streamlined. So, with the permission of the chair, may I declare this session for today, that is day 12 of Vedic Age, open or closed? Thank you, chair. The session is closed for now.